And we read again in verse 1. The burden, oh, I like this, of the word of the Lord for Israel. He's telling them some bad news. Everybody say bad news. Saith the Lord, which stretched forth the heavens and the layers, the foundations of the earth, and formeth the spirits of man within him. Behold, I will make Jerusalem a cup of trembling unto all the people round about, when they shall be in the singe, or the siege, both against Judah and against Jerusalem. And in that day, everybody say, in that day. Now, if you don't believe me here, in that day, you see it there in verse 3. Look in verse 4. What does it say? Look in verse 6. There, you're way ahead of me. In that day. Look in verse 8. What does it say? Look in verse 9. What does it say? Look in verse 11. What does it say? Look in verse 13. What does it say? Chapter 13, verse 1. And what does it say in verse 2? And it shall come to pass in what? In that day. Anyway, I can do the rest of the chapter, but we don't have time. Everybody say, in that day. What he's talking about is in this day. Come with me again. 490 years, Zechariah, who is with Ezra and with Nehemiah and with Esther, rebuilding the temple of God. The temple in the midst. Remember, some of you that were not here the last several months, the first part of the chapter was them traveling from Babylon down and God rebuking them because they took their gods with them. They were still worshiping Baal. And God stopped them outside of Jerusalem, said, I will not allow you to come in until you get rid of those false gods. They came back in, there was a 20-year gap. There was a what? Now chapters 9 through 14 is after the 20-year gap. The temple's been rebuilt. Now God is saying to this group, now that the temple is here, Messiah is going to come in his first advent. His first what? We call it the Advent season because Jesus came. And, this is me running, his second advent when Jesus comes at the second temple, which is yet to be built. Now let's go back to chapter 12 again, if we could. We hear, question number 2, we hear here the voice of God. And he says here, I'm going to make Jerusalem a cup of trembling to the world. Well, we see that happening even today, both Advents. But right here, 490 years, Jesus comes. He silenced the 3 shepherds. Those shepherds connive to have him crucified. He's killed 40 years after the temple is destroyed, AD 70. How many years after? How many years after? Remember that number 40. The temple is destroyed, and that's what he's talking about here. He said, okay, you killed my son. I'm going to make Jerusalem a cup of trembling. Let me show you one more. Look in verses 3 and 4. And in that day, in the day what? Jesus dies. In what day? Everybody say Jesus died. I will make Jerusalem a burdensome stone for all the people. All that burden themselves with it shall be cut into pieces, though all the people of the earth shall be gathered together against it. And in that day, saith the Lord, I will smite every horse with astonishment and riders of madness. By the way, first Advent, same thing's going to happen in the second Advent. Once that temple is going to be rebuilt, and I'll be honest with you, friends, could even happen this year. It's going to happen soon because the Pope's on a roll right now, okay? He's on a roll. Friends, I'm not, Google it. When you do it, you'll see about 100 Googles. It's just in there. What's holding up? Probably some America, some other people that are against it, but sooner or later, just like what happened in Cuba, will happen because of the influence of the Pope. Believe it or not, as I preached when I've taught on the Pope, I believe he could be, or at least that religion of tolerance will be the religion of the false prophet of that day. In that second advent, Jerusalem will again become a burden stone. Same thing that happened here 40 years after Christ will happen again when he comes again. Who predicted it? Everybody say Zechariah. Look in verse 6, number 5 on your question, and we'll close here in a minute. What's the first three words? In that day, I will make the governors of Judah like the hearth or the hearth of a fire amongst the wood, and like a torch of fire of a sheaf, and they shall devour all the people. By the way, the temple, everybody say 40 years. 40 years. AD 70, 40 years after Jesus. So destroyed the temple, what the Romans did is they burned the temple so they could get the gold out from between the rocks. It melted. They would put wood and put it against it because gold melts easily. They wanted all the gold. Exactly what happened. Come with me. The Bible says, Linda, look up for me. I believe it's 1 Peter, but it could be 2 Peter 3:10. So look at both. It should say elements burning. In the last days, God will send down fire, once again destroying Jerusalem and all those that go against it. Everybody say same thing. Well, in that same thing, we're seeing here, look in verse 8. The first time he says, in that day shall the Lord defend the inhabitants of Jerusalem. Jerusalem's still there. Everybody say still there. 500 years later, Jerusalem's what? 1,000 years. We're in the Crusades. Many of your family history, my family history, my coat of arms. If your coat of arms has a head of a knight and it's black, somebody died in the Crusades in your family. If your coat of arms has a shield or a head helmet and it's white, they fought in the Crusades, but they didn't die. It's in your coat of arms. But Jerusalem's still there. The Muslims come in, and they've been in control of Jerusalem 700 years. But what? Jerusalem's still there. Why? God said, I have a binding judgment. God's going to use it again. There are other places in Israel you can't find. They disappeared. We might know where they are, but they're not still there. But let me tell you, the Jews can still go to the Wailing Wall. They know exactly where everything is. Why? Everybody say binding judgment. Did you find it? 2 Peter, is it second? 2 Peter chapter 3, verse 10.
But the day of the Lord will come like a thief, in which the heavens will pass away with a roar, and the elements will be destroyed with intense heat, and the earth and its works will be burned up.
Burned up. Friends, everybody say it was predicted. If it happened 40 years after Jesus, just like it was predicted, it's going to happen 2,000 years later, just as he predicted it. Look in verses 9 and 10. I think I'll close there. First three words. In that day that I will seek to destroy the nations that come against what? And I will pour upon the house of David and upon the inhabitants of Jerusalem the spirit of what? Now listen. In the last days, and you and I are living there, I hate to talk about our descendants, but my family and your family, we killed the Jews. During the Inquisition, the Catholic Church, you either converted or died. In fact, America was founded on the gold teeth of the Jews. Queen Isabella banished every Jew from Spain. If they didn't banish, they killed them, took their gold, and that's where the money came from to finance Columbus's journey. We were terrible to the Jews. It's only been since 1948. The world has changed because of World War II and killing 6.5 million Jews in Auschwitz and other places. And the world gave Israel, the first time in all of 6,000 years of history, gave back their land. They didn't have to fight for it. They've had to fight to keep it. But they were given it by God in a gift because God said it. And in that time, God said, I preserve this for you. And any country that comes against you, I will destroy. And any country that blesses you, I will bless. You can look at our economy here in America and the problems here with America. As we have turned our backs against Israel, our economy and our country has gone the opposite way. We have a president now who will not call it Israel. He calls it Palestine. He is more in favor of the Muslims than he is of the Jews. Netanyahu, the leading prime minister of Israel, had to go into the White House in the back door. No pomp and ceremony. But when the Arabs came in, the red carpet was poured out, the trumpets and the shields came out, and ceremony was given. It was mentioned in all the news. It was a slap into their face. And the economy went down again. May I say to you, friends, what God is saying here? I've kept Jerusalem. And in the last days, I'm going to pour my grace upon them. Something is happening in Israel. People are coming to know the Lord in the Jewish faith like never before. You've seen the television commercials on Fox News and others, how the Christians are trying to help the Jews come back into the land. There's a revival. John Hagee has given millions of dollars to helping the Jews. The gospel is opening up. People are being saved. His grace is pouring out. And we're living in the very days of the book of Zechariah. Come next Sunday, and we'll finish this book if we're still here. Let's stand together in prayer.